This is Plant-Based Briefing, Bird Flu, Emergence, Dangers, and Preventive Measures, Part 1, by Dr. Michael Greger at nutritionfacts.org. And I'm Marian Erickson, your host. This is the curated content plant-based podcast where I narrate a variety of articles on plant-based and vegan living with permission in about 10 minutes or less every weekday. And this article is a bit longer than that, so it's a two-parter. I'll read the first half today and then tune back in tomorrow for Part 2. And now let's get to today's plant-based briefing. Bird Flu, Emergence, Dangers, and Preventive Measures, Part 1, by Dr. Michael Greger at nutritionfacts.org. In the United States, in January 2025 alone, approximately 20 million commercially raised birds, mostly egg-laying hens, were affected by the highly pathogenic avian influenza, H5N1. These numbers are staggering, yet barely scratch the surface of a potentially larger threat looming over the country. If action is not taken now, the next pandemic could be far deadlier than the 1918 influenza and COVID-19. What was the 1918 influenza? According to the World Health Organization, the 1918 influenza pandemic killed more people in less time than any other disease before or since. It was the most deadly disease event in the history of humanity. Indeed, it killed more people in a single year than the bubonic plague or the Black Death in the Middle Ages killed in a century. The 1918 virus also killed more people in 25 weeks than AIDS killed in 25 years. According to one academic reviewer, this single brief epidemic generated more fatalities, more suffering, and more demographic change in the United States than all the wars of the 20th century. What caused the 1918 flu pandemic? Although the human influenza virus wasn't even discovered until 1933, an inspector with the U.S. Bureau of Animal Industry had been publishing research as early as 1919 that suggested a role for farm animals in the pandemic. Inspector J.S. Cohn of Fort Dodge, Iowa, wrote, "The similarity of the epidemic among people and the epidemic among pigs was so close, the reports so frequent, that an outbreak in the family would be followed immediately by an outbreak among the hogs and vice versa, as to present a most striking coincidence if not suggesting a close relation between the two conditions. It looked like flu, and until proven it was not flu, I shall stand by that diagnosis." The answer to where the 1918 virus came from was published in October 2005. Humanity's greatest killer appeared to originally come from avian influenza, or bird flu. What is bird flu? Evidence now suggests that all pandemic influenza viruses, in fact, all human and mammalian flu viruses in general, owe their origins to avian influenza. Back in 1918, school children jumped rope to a morbid little rhyme. I had a little bird, its name was Enza, I opened the window, and influenza. Is bird flu worse than regular flu? As devastating as the 1918 pandemic was, the mortality rate was less than 5% on average. But the H5N1 strain of bird flu virus that first emerged in China in 1997 and spread to more than 60 countries seems to kill about 50% of its known human victims, on par with some strains of Ebola, making it potentially 10 times as deadly as the worst plague in human history. Leading public health authorities from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, to the World Health Organization feared that this bird flu virus was but mutations away from spreading efficiently through the human population, triggering the next pandemic. The lethal capacity of this virus is very, very high, so it's a deadly virus that humans have not been exposed to before. That's a very bad combination, said Erwin Redlener, former director of the National Center for Disease Preparedness at Columbia University. Scientists speculate worst-case scenarios in which H5N1 could end up killing 1 billion or more people around the world. The only thing I can think of that could take a larger human death toll would be thermonuclear war, said Council on Foreign Relations Senior Fellow Laurie Garrett. H5N1 has the potential to become a virus as ferocious as Ebola and as contagious as the common cold. H1N1 versus H5N1. The 1918 pandemic virus was H1N1. The annual flu strain remained H1N1, infecting relatively few people every year for decades until 1957, when an H2N2 virus suddenly appeared as the Asian flu pandemic. Because the world's population had essentially only acquired immunity to H1 spikes, the virus raced around the globe, infecting a significant portion of the world's population. For example, half of U.S. school children fell ill. H2N2 held seasonal sway for 11 years. In 1968, the H3N2 Hong Kong flu virus triggered another pandemic and has been with us every year since. So there were 3 influenza pandemics in the 20th century, in 1918, 1957, and 1968. But as the director of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases has said, there are pandemics and then there are pandemics. The half-and-half bird-human hybrid viruses of 1957 and 1968 evidently contained enough previously recognizable human structure that the human population's prior partial exposure dampened the pandemic's potential to do harm. In contrast, the pandemic strain of 1918 was wholly avian-like. Instead of diluting its alien avian nature, the 1918 bird flu virus likely jumped straight to humans and began killing them, noted Taubenberger, the man who helped resurrect it. The same could be happening with the new spate of avian influenza viruses sporadically infecting people in more recent years, like H5N1. The human immune system had never been known to be exposed to an H5 virus before. As the World Health Organization points out, population vulnerability to an H5N1-like pandemic virus would be universal. How dangerous is H5N1 bird flu? H5N1 developed a level of human lethality not thought possible for influenza. So far, about half of those known to have come down with this flu have died. H5N1 is good at killing, but not at spreading. To trigger a pandemic, the virus has to learn how to spread efficiently from person to person. Now that the genome of the 1918 virus has been completely sequenced, we understand that it may have taken only a few dozen mutations to turn a bird flu virus into humanity's greatest killer, and we have seen some of those changes taking form in H5N1. The further H5N1 spreads and the more people it infects, the greater the likelihood that it might lock in mutations that could allow for efficient human-to-human transmission. And that's what keeps us up at night, said the chair of the Infectious Diseases Society of America's Task Force on Pandemic Influenza. How did bird flu emerge? More than a century ago, researchers confirmed the first outbreak of a particularly lethal form of avian influenza that they called foul plague. Plague comes from the Greek word meaning blow or strike. Later, the name foul plague was abandoned and replaced by highly pathogenic avian influenza, or HPAI. Domesticated poultry can also become infected with a low-grade influenza, so-called low pathogenic avian influenza, or LPAI, which may cause a few ruffled feathers and a drop in egg production. Influenza viruses with H5 or H7 spikes, however, are able to mutate into the high-grade variety that can cause devastating illness among the birds. Webster's term for H5 and H7 strains of flu says it all, the nasty bastards, and you don't get nastier than H5. Avian influenza, poultry, and eggs. To avoid contracting bird flu, an influenza expert at the UK Health Protection Agency warned, avoid being in touching distance of birds who could be affected, don't kiss chickens. Kissing aside, what is the risk of putting our lips on them in other ways? In 2001, the virus was found and confirmed in frozen duck meat. The investigators concluded the isolation of an H5N1 influenza virus from duck meat and the presence of infectious virus in muscle tissue of experimentally infected ducks raises concern that meat produced by this species may serve as a vehicle for the transmission of H5N1 virus to humans. The finding of H5N1 contaminated poultry meat triggered a more extensive survey. Top flu researchers at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, looked into chicken meat. Chickens who inhaled H5N1 became infected even more systematically than did ducks. The virus spread through the internal organs, into the muscle tissue, and even out into the skin. Virus was found in both white and dark meat. There is a precedent for bird-borne virus-infected meat. Unlike bacteria, viruses can remain infective for prolonged periods even in processed foods. Some methods of preservation, like refrigeration, freezing, or salting, may even extend the persistence of viruses in food. On the other hand, since viruses cannot replicate without living tissue, improper storage of food is less problematic. What about eggs? Be careful with eggs, the World Health Organization has warned. Eggs from infected poultry could also be contaminated with the H5N1 virus. You just listened to Bird Flu, Emergence, Dangers, and Preventive Measures, Part 1 by Michael Greger, MD at nutritionfacts.org. And I'm your host, Marian Erickson. Tune in tomorrow for the second half of this episode. where you'll hear how the virus mutates and gets more virulent, whether it can be eradicated, what are breeding grounds for disease, what can we do about it, and eating to beat bird flu. So please share this episode with anyone who might benefit, and thanks for listening.